My talk today is on psychological approaches with treatment-resistant wetting. And so the purpose of my talk today is to give a sense of what psychologists can do with this population here, and also to provide some skills that may inform or that you can incorporate into your practice. So the psychologist's role. So most children will be successfully treated, but there'll be a minority who fail to progress as expected. And there'll be a number of different reasons for why this occurs. Most commonly, there'll be a number of child issues in terms of compliance or adherence, motivation. There may be shame, guilt, anxiety. There may be just general behavioural or mental health issues. There also may be a number of family issues that might be involved in terms of just general parent management, also just parental frustration in terms of feeling like they've been doing this for years and years and years, and they might get better and then they go backwards, and then kind of just feels like it's going around in circles for ages. And also there may be some families that are separated with different parental styles in each household, but may also be chaotic and dysfunctional. And there may also be a number of school issues as well. So there might be difficulties in terms of getting permission from the teachers, access to the toilet, not wanting to miss out on class or hanging out with their friends. There may be some anxieties as well, and also some general peer issues. So there are a number of issues related for children to not progress as well as expected. And so referral to psychologists can be a useful and an important part of treatment. And referral to psychologists would be for brief, targeted, supported intervention. And I mentioned brief, targeted because psychologists generally would deal with a range of different emotional and behavioural problems. The way that I explain to kids and families in the clinic is saying that my role in the clinic is quite different, in that my role is specifically helping the kids and their families to follow the program better. And so I just written a list of different things that we might do as psychologists for this population. And when a referral is made to psychologists, so for example from the medical team to myself, some useful bits that help with this referral process is for the medical team to inform myself of the bladder program, whether it be urotherapy, time voiding, whether there's a bowel program involved, whether they're doing alarm training, and then indicating which areas are requiring support. So sometimes the medical team might say, for this particular child, they need assistance in terms of time voiding, or there might be in terms of motivation or compliance or forgetting and those kind of things. And also really important to maintain communication about program changes. So it'd be unfortunate if I would spend the hour working with a child on timed voiding, for example, and then finding out that that's not the main bit of the program. The main bit is actually to do with the fecal incontinence. And so there are a number of different interventions that psychologists can do. And if there are any psychologists in the room, this might look like a very simplified version of the kind of work that we would do with kids with general behavioural and emotional problems. And the reason for this is because it's quite specific and targeted to helping the kids comply with the program. So these are a number of things that I'm going to cover through briefly. If you don't have the opportunities or the resources to have psychologists work in your team, but these are some, I'm hoping that going through some of these things will give you some ideas or some skills that you might be able to use as well in your practice. So firstly, we will do a brief assessment. So thinking about who's in the family, just drawing a simple genogram in terms of who lives at home or who the child spends a lot of time with, and that most of the time, provides information, but sometimes it also provides very crucial information in terms of separated family or a death of a family member, or different information that might come through that will, give you more information about the presenting problem. Thinking through and asking about the main toileting concerns, firstly from the medical team, but also from the family as well. Which bits are they most concerned about? Asking about which parts of the program are difficult. So I normally talk about with the kids saying that the program is pretty tedious, it's hard to do, it's boring, trying to normalise it, and then work out which part of it they find the most difficult and which part that we could work on. And so one easy question to ask is, what makes it tricky for you to do the time voiding? So just trying to work out why it's difficult for them and getting an assessment of, is it because they're worried about missing class? Is it because they try to remember but they forget? Or is it because their family isn't providing the support that they need? So just working out what makes it tricky for them to do X, Y, Z of the program. And then also checking understanding of the program. We find that most families, well, a number of families will nod and say yes, that they understand the program as the medical team's explaining it to them, but it's possible that they're not fully understanding all the different components or why things need to happen. So even just a simple checking that they understand will give them the opportunity to ask more questions if they need. So on that, a big part of what we do is provide psychoeducation and helping the families and the kids understand what it is they're doing and understand a bit more about how the body works. And so, the previous presenters have already talked about a number of these. The way that we would try to aid and facilitate that education would be to help reframe the problem as medical or developmental. And the point of that is to normalise it and to externalise it, so it's not that the child that is the problem, but rather that the fact that they can't go to the toilet is because of the signal to the brain and the bladder, and those kind of things, talking about how the program is boring. We don't really expect kids to be jumping for joy to be able to do that. One example we might give is, to the parent, is imagine if you're at a party and you were told that you needed to go brush your teeth 20 times during the party. Like, no one's going to want to do that. And in the same way, kids aren't going to want to have to go to the toilet every 2 hours when they don't feel the need to do that and they don't get that relief from voiding. And part of that also reduces blame and frustration for the family. And part of that would also be to be able to acknowledge and validate and empathise with their feelings of frustration. And so we would use a whole range of different stories and analogies and narratives to try and help the child and parent understand what's happening for their bodies and what's happening with their treatment program. And so for example, we might talk about the brain and bladder being good friends, and so that at some point the bladder was trying to tell the brain, hey, it's time to go, come play with me. And the brain's like, no, I'm busy at the moment, I'll do it later. No, not right now, I'm watching TV. And then the bladder will be like, no, I need to go now, let's go play, let's go hang out. The brain would say, no, just later, just leave it for now. And then over time, what happens to the bladder? The bladder stops trying to talk to the brain. The bladder stops trying to tell the brain that it's time to go. And so the brain doesn't hear the signals that the bladder is sending. And so the whole point of time voiding is to try and help the brain and the bladder sync up again and to be better friends with each other. And so you can use that in any way you like, but just an example of some way to help kids and families understand a little bit more about what's happening in a way that might be user-friendly and in a way that they might be able to remember as they're doing the program. And then also in terms of doing drinks and voiding, we talk about needing to make the bladder bigger. We talk about it or visualise it in a sense of expanding a balloon. And so, needing to do big drinks in order to blow up the balloon nice and big and then shrink it, and that helps to expand the bladder. And so a lot of these would just be kind of stories or narratives that might aid with understanding. So another thing that we like to use is this idea about pushing the ball up a hill. Because the number of families that we see have been through this for years, particularly when they come to a point of needing referral to a psychologist. They've been doing alarm training or doing the program for years and just been kind of getting better and then not, getting better and then not, and a lot of times that comes with a lot of family frustration. And so part of what we try to use as an analogy is this idea of pushing the ball up a hill. And so, we might draw this picture and then say that, that the child is that person there trying to push this ball up a hill. And every time they try and they work really hard, they're pushing the ball, and it gets closer and closer and closer to the top of the hill. But every so often, they might think, oh no, things are too hard, I'm just going to stop. No, I'm not going to do this anymore. And the ball rolls back down again. And this idea of needing to continue to push the ball up the hill and continue to push and continue to keep going with the program until it gets to a point where then the ball just continues rolling. And part of this is to help instill a motivation and hope and this idea that there will be an end goal to their progress. So another part of what we do is behaviour modification. And so, like I mentioned before, not trying to normalise this idea of lack of intrinsic motivation. So, when we go to the toilet, we feel that sense of relief. But whereas these kids most of the time won't get that sense. It's more that they're going to the toilet because they need to, because their watch tells them it's time to go, and they're needing to drink more than they generally feel like drinking. So firstly, normalising that, and then needing to provide some behavioural modification strategies to help aid with treatment when motivation isn't necessarily there. So some general behavioural management strategies, including instruction giving. So parents talk a lot about always telling their kids, you need to go to the toilet now, you need to go to the toilet now, and then they engage in this battle that kind of goes on forever. So ways to help sort of divert that would be to give instructions by prompting once, stating a time frame. So, in 5 minutes you need to take your Osmolex, and then if they don't do that within the 5 minutes, then prompting again saying you need to take it now, and then giving them a choice. So either doing whatever the program is, or the consequence that will occur from that. And that gives the ownership over to the child and reduces that power struggle or battle that might occur. And if parents are going to state a reward or consequence, it's important that they follow through with that. Another useful system for behavioural modification would be using a reward system. And so this can be useful, like I said, because there's a lack of intrinsic motivation, and so needing some external or extrinsic motivation to help them to get through certain parts of the program. So part of that would be creating this reward system. And just a few points to note when setting this up is that for the child and parent to create rewards together, and that gives a bit more ownership for the child. And there's no point saying, you get an extra 10 minutes on the TV when they're really wanting to hang out with their dad instead. It's important to target specific behaviours. So not saying, at some point do really well in your homework, but rather, drinking this amount of fluids, voiding at this particular time, taking this much of the medication. And with this, it's important to note that when you are rewarding, when the parents are rewarding, they're rewarding the behaviour, not the outcome. So a lot of parents fall into the trap of rewarding, every time the child is dry, or not rewarding every time the child is wet. Whereas they don't necessarily have control over that aspect. Because some children can do all the right things, but for whatever reason might still be wet. And so really focusing on the rewards and things like that, on the behaviour that the child does have control over. And like I mentioned before, it's important to follow through with the reward. If that can't be consistently done, then it's probably better to not use a reward system. So token economy is essentially a fancy star chart or reward chart, in a sense that they, get a star for doing parts of the programs, maybe an extra star if they, self-initiate that. And so stars are placed on the chart. And then the thing that makes it a little bit more interesting and more engaging for children is that they have a reward shop that they can go from. And these are the rewards that the child has chosen and the parents have approved of. And they are each associated with an amount of stars or points. And so they can either cash in for some of these rewards, or they can save them up for a bigger reward if that's what they like. And so having a variety of different value rewards is really useful for that. And then this app called the iReward app, which is free for the first child, I think. And then if you want multiple children to be listed up there, then you pay a small fee for it. And then that's just a really engaging, modern new age iPhone way of doing the reward chats here. And then you can add stars there and then the reward payouts on the side. So some also useful things for forgetters is using physical prompts or phone alarms or an alarm watch, or helping the child pair particular behaviours with each other. So say, for example, at school, there's a routine already set in there. So asking them whether, which part of the school routine would they like to do the drinks and time voiding, and pairing that up can help with people who forget very easily. But this will aid with memory, but not motivation. And children come up with a whole bunch of different ideas themselves, and so if they can come up with bits, then that will help be most motivating for them. And so some of the families that we work with, like I mentioned, come in with a lot of frustration, sometimes anger, sometimes just feeling hopeless. And so thinking about addressing some of these issues will help treatment to be more effective. So either just general counselling or addressing, low mood or providing adequate support for the family. And finally, school liaison. So a lot of the child's life is going to be at school, and it's really important to being, either for the parent to speak with the school, or for the clinic as well to speak with them, just with regards to explaining what the program is, explaining the treatment, helping them understand that the child, when the child needs to go to the toilet, they can't wait 5 minutes until recess, they need to go at that point, and that's part of the program. And then they can also be involved with helping with any peer-related issues or any anxieties around school. So, for example, providing a key to a particular toilet so that the child doesn't have to wait in line. So those kind of like problem-solving bits might be useful for schools to be able to assist with. And then just quickly in terms of alarm training, which we talked about later, but in terms of normalising the fact that they're not going to really want to do it, finding some rewards for them, again rewarding the behaviour, so in terms of getting up to the toilet and doing a wee as opposed to being wet or dry, because say for example they might not have control over that, and then problem solving any potential barriers in terms of anxiety, and helping the deep sleepers. And then so generally if there are other behavioural, emotional issues, mental health issues that are happening there outside the scope of the toileting issues, then referral to a community psychologist would be important. So that's all from me. Is there time for questions?
One question. How do we get funding for psychologists? I bill it actually. So I could. We might just So what I've done is if you can build a multidisciplinary team and you bill a multidisciplinary appointment, the funding that covers that actually pays for my whole team. So there is a financial model that you can work on for for people who want to set up units. It's financially cost neutral for this hospital to have our whole team, but you have to work efficiently.
Yeah, sure. So the question was in terms of families who come in that kind of where the mum or dad seems particularly indifferent or standoffish or angry. Is that the question? Yeah. And so part of the bits that I was talking about before in terms of just general counselling and validating where the anger and frustration is coming from, and also some education as well might be useful for that, because they may think, oh, the child should know that they should be doing this and why aren't they doing it? But explaining what's happening for the child and providing, bits to help engage them along with the program, and giving each of them a role for themselves as well can be a useful process. And then just asking questions about what makes it difficult, what are their opinions on it, and just trying to understand where they're coming from and addressing that as it comes up. Yeah. So thank you. And I just wanted to make a quick acknowledgement for Chris Hardwick, another clinical psychologist in the Psych Med department, for his contribution to the Bladder Clinic and this presentation. Thank you.